The first thing my wife heard after the crash was not the sound of the ambulance. It was my brother's voice, not through his mouth, inside his head. If she wakes up, we're finished. My wife, Clara, opened her eyes beneath the harsh white hospital lights. She looked at my brother, standing beside her bed. He was pale, trembling, and pretending to pray. Then she looked at me. I was sitting in the corner with blood dried on my sleeve, my hands clasped so tightly together that my knuckles had turned white. "Daniel," she whispered. I stood immediately. "I'm here." Her eyes stayed on me for several seconds. Then she asked something that made the entire room feel colder. "Why does Ethan think we're finished?" My brother froze. I frowned. "What?" Clara's lips parted. She looked frightened by her own question. Ethan didn't say anything. "No," she whispered. "But he thought it." I stared at her. The accident had happened less than 3 hours earlier. Our car had spun across a wet road, struck the guardrail, and rolled twice before landing against a concrete barrier. I remembered the glass exploding around us. I remembered Clara's hand slipping from mine. I remembered shouting her name. But I didn't remember anything after that. The doctor said she had suffered a concussion and some temporary neurological disturbance. They called it confusion, stress, trauma. They told us unusual sensations could happen after an accident. What they didn't know was that Clara could hear every thought around her, and what she heard next would destroy the life I had spent 10 years protecting. Ethan stepped closer to her bed. "Clara, you should rest." She looked directly at him. Then her face changed. "What did you do with the files?" Ethan's expression went blank. "What files?" "The files you thought about hiding." My stomach tightened. "Ethan," he laughed nervously. "She's confused." But Clara shook her head. "No, you're thinking about the blue folder." Ethan stopped breathing for a moment. I noticed. Clara noticed too. She looked at me, and for the first time since the accident, I saw something in her eyes that wasn't fear. It was suspicion. The blue folder belonged to my company, a small engineering firm I had built from nothing. For years, I had worked quietly on a battery control system that could make electric vehicles safer and more efficient. I had never told anyone much about it, not even Clara, not because I didn't trust her, because I wanted to surprise her when the patent was approved. I had been planning to use the money to buy the small lakeside house she had always dreamed about. I thought I was protecting our future. I didn't know someone else had already been planning to steal it. Ethan was my younger brother. He had joined my company 2 years earlier after his own business failed. I gave him a second chance. I gave him a salary. I gave him access. Most importantly, I gave him my trust. Clara had always defended him. "He's your brother, Daniel." Whenever I complained that Ethan was careless, she would smile and say, "He's family." I listened, because I loved her, because I believed marriage meant choosing patience when anger would be easier, and because I remembered the first time Clara had chosen me. 10 years earlier, I had been working nights at a small repair shop. She came in with a broken motorcycle helmet. She didn't have enough money to replace it. I fixed it for free. She stared at me and said, "You know you're terrible at business, right?" I laughed. "You know you're terrible at thanking people, right?" She smiled. That was how it began. Years later, when I proposed, she cried so hard she couldn't answer. We promised each other one thing. No matter how difficult life became, we would never become strangers. That promise was the reason I kept forgiving things that should have hurt more than they did. But now, lying in that hospital room, Clara heard another thought. This time, it belonged to me. Please let her be okay. Her eyes softened. Then she suddenly grabbed my wrist. "Daniel, I'm here. You didn't cause the crash." I stared at her. Of course I didn't. She swallowed. I know. There was something strange about the way she said it, as if she had just confirmed something I hadn't told her. Before I could ask, the doctor returned and asked everyone to leave. Ethan walked toward the door. Then Clara suddenly called out, "Ethan." He turned. She looked straight at him. "Who is Marcus?" His face lost all color. I had never heard that name from Clara. Ethan hadn't spoken it, but Clara had heard it somewhere, inside his mind. And whatever Marcus was to Ethan, the name frightened him more than the crash ever could. That night, Clara refused to sleep. She kept staring at the ceiling. I sat beside her bed, holding a paper cup of vending machine coffee that had gone cold hours ago. "Daniel?" "Yes." "Can I ask you something strange?" I smiled weakly. "After today, I think we've earned the right to strange. She turned toward me. What if you could hear what people were thinking? I thought she was joking. You'd probably hear me thinking that this coffee tastes like engine oil. She didn't smile. I can hear them. My hand stopped halfway to my mouth. Whose thoughts? Everyone. She closed her eyes. When the nurse came in, I heard her worrying about her son's exam. When the doctor checked my pupils, I heard him thinking I might have memory problems. She opened her eyes again. And when Ethan came in, I heard him thinking about the blue folder. I said nothing. She continued. He was terrified that you would find out what was inside. What was inside? I don't know. Then why didn't you ask him? Because he would lie. She paused. And because I'm scared of what I'll hear next. I reached for her hand. Clara, listen to me. Whatever is happening, we'll figure it out. She stared at our hands. Then she whispered, that's what you always say. There was no accusation in her voice. That somehow made it worse. The next morning, Ethan arrived with flowers. He smiled as if nothing had happened. How are you feeling? Clara looked at him. I'm better. His thoughts were silent to me, but she heard them. She knows about Marcus. Clara's fingers tightened around the blanket. Who is Marcus? Ethan dropped the flowers. I stood. Ethan. He looked at Clara. Who told you that name? Nobody. His breathing changed. Clara looked at me. Daniel, we need to talk. Ethan stepped forward. She's not thinking clearly. I turned toward him. Then why are you afraid? He didn't answer. That was the first crack. The second came later that afternoon. My business partner called. He told me someone had accessed our private research server 2 nights before the accident. The stolen files included the prototype designs I had spent 4 years developing. The access came from an employee account. Ethan's account. I felt something inside me go numb. I called him. He denied everything. I would never do that. Then explain your account. I don't know. You expect me to believe that? I expect you to remember I'm your brother. I closed my eyes. That sentence hurt because it was exactly what he had always used. Family, loyalty, trust, words that had slowly become chains. Then Clara heard something from him. She looked at me. Daniel. I turned. What? Her face was pale. Ethan is thinking about the woman. What woman? She didn't answer immediately. Then she whispered a name. Vanessa. My wife knew that name. I knew it too. Vanessa had been Ethan's former business partner. She had disappeared from his life months earlier after accusing him of stealing company funds. At the time, Ethan told me she was unstable. I believed him. Clara believed him. Now, she was hearing something different. Ethan was thinking about Vanessa, and he was thinking about a payment. A payment made 3 days before our crash. Clara suddenly sat upright. He paid someone. Who? I don't know. She pressed both hands against her temples. It's too loud. I moved toward her. Clara. There's so many thoughts. Her breathing became rapid. People lie with their mouths, but their minds don't stop. I held her shoulders. Look at me. She did. You're safe. She whispered, I don't know if I am. That sentence broke something inside me. Not because I was angry, because I realized my wife was afraid of the world, and I had no idea how to protect her from something no one else could even see. 3 days later, the police discovered something beneath the damaged car. A small tracking device. It hadn't been installed by the manufacturer. Someone had placed it there shortly before the crash. The detective asked me if anyone had a reason to follow us. I thought about Ethan. Then I thought about Vanessa. Then I thought about the blue folder. I wanted to believe there was an innocent explanation. I wanted to believe my brother was still my brother. Most of all, I wanted to believe my marriage was still the place where I could finally stop doubting people. But Clara was sitting beside me, listening to thoughts no one else could hear. Suddenly, she looked at me. Her eyes filled with tears. Daniel. What? She whispered 4 words. Ethan wants you gone. And this time, I knew she wasn't talking about the company. She was talking about our marriage. For the next week, I stopped asking Clara what people were thinking. Not because I didn't want to know, because I was beginning to understand that knowing could be more painful than ignorance. She had become quieter too. Whenever someone entered the hospital room, her eyes would flicker toward them, then away. Sometimes she would suddenly say, "Don't trust him." Other times, she said nothing at all. The hardest part was that she never seemed relieved by the truth. She looked exhausted by it. One evening, I brought her the old silver bracelet I had given her on our 5th anniversary. She smiled when she saw it. You kept it. You threw it into a drawer and forgot about it. I didn't forget. She turned it over in her fingers. The bracelet had a tiny engraving inside. Still us. She traced the words. I remember that night. So do I. We had been too broke for a fancy anniversary dinner. I cooked noodles in our apartment, burned half of them, and pretended they were supposed to taste smoky. Clara had laughed until she cried. Back then, happiness had been cheap. A small apartment, 2 mismatched chairs, 1 old fan that rattled all night. And somehow, it had felt like enough. Now we had a successful company, a beautiful home, savings, everything people thought a married couple should want. Yet sitting beside her hospital bed, I realized we had slowly traded peace for appearances. Clara suddenly looked at me. What are you thinking? That I miss those days? She looked away. So do I. Neither of us said anything for a while. Then she whispered, Daniel, did you ever hide anything from me? I hesitated. The patent project. Her eyes widened. What? I was going to tell you after it was approved. She stared at me. You worked on that for years. Yes. Why didn't you tell me? I wanted to surprise you. She laughed softly, but there was sadness in it. You always wanted to surprise me. I thought you liked surprises. I liked feeling included. That sentence stayed with me. I had been so proud of protecting our future that I hadn't noticed I was shutting her out of the present. Before I could answer, Ethan entered. His smile vanished when he saw the bracelet. He had seen it before. Clara noticed his thought immediately. She still believes Daniel loves her. I need to make her doubt him. I looked at Ethan. What? He blinked. Nothing. Clara said quietly, You should leave. Ethan looked shocked. Clara, please. He left. I waited until the door closed. What did he think? She shook her head. Something about making me doubt you. My chest tightened. Why? I don't know. But she did. I could see it in her face. She was beginning to understand that Ethan's betrayal wasn't just about money or company files. He had been manipulating us for months, maybe years. The next morning, Clara received an envelope. No return address. Inside was a photograph. Ethan stood beside a woman, Vanessa. Behind them was a warehouse. On the back of the photograph was a handwritten sentence. Ask your husband why he paid me to stay quiet. Clara stared at it. Then she looked at me. Did you pay Vanessa? No. Her expression changed, not into suspicion, into fear, because somewhere beneath the lie, there was a truth. Someone had been using my name. We hired a private investigator. 2 days later, he found the first real clue. A bank transfer. Money had been sent from an account connected to my company to Vanessa 6 months earlier. The authorization appeared to carry my digital signature, but I had never approved it. Someone had cloned my credentials. And then the investigator found something worse. 3 weeks before the crash, a second transfer had been made. This time, the recipient was Marcus, the man Clara had heard Ethan thinking about. I stared at the paperwork. Who is he? The investigator answered carefully. Former security contractor. He worked for your company briefly. I remembered him. Marcus had been fired after violating company security rules. I had assumed that was the end of it. It wasn't. He had been hired again. By Ethan. Clara closed her eyes. Then she suddenly gasped. I heard him. Marcus. She nodded. He's thinking about the crash. The room went silent. What is he thinking? Her face went pale. He didn't mean for us to die. I felt the blood leave my face. He says, she swallowed. He was only supposed to scare you. I stood so quickly that the chair fell behind me. Who told him to do it? Clara looked directly at me. Ethan. For the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt something colder. Certainty. The person I had spent years defending had tried to frighten me off my own company. And when that failed, he had put my wife in a car that nearly killed her. But there was still one question. Why? What was Ethan trying so desperately to hide? The answer arrived that same evening. My lawyer called. The patent office had received a withdrawal request for my application. Someone had claimed the invention belonged to Ethan. The signature was mine. The documents were forged. And if the patent had been transferred successfully, Ethan would have owned everything I had spent 4 years building. I sat beside Clara in silence. She reached for my hand. I'm sorry. I looked at her. For what? For believing him. I squeezed her fingers. You believe me too. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. I stopped believing you before I knew why. That hurt more than anything Ethan had done, because suddenly I understood the real damage. He hadn't just tried to steal my work. He had poisoned the trust between my wife and me, and I had helped him by keeping secrets in the name of love. I didn't confront Ethan. That surprised everyone. My lawyer expected me to call the police immediately. The investigator expected me to demand an arrest. Clara expected me to shout. Instead, I went home. I packed one suitcase. Clara watched me from the doorway. Where are you going? To the house. Our house. Yes. She frowned. Why? Because Ethan thinks I'm going to fight him. I looked at her. I don't want to fight him anymore. That night, I entered my office for the first time since the accident. Everything looked exactly as I'd left it. Blueprints, prototype components, coffee stains, a framed photograph of Clara laughing beside the lake. I picked it up. I remembered the promise I had made years earlier. One day I would build something meaningful, something that could make people's lives safer. Clara had believed in that dream before anyone else did. Then I remembered the day I first showed Ethan the prototype. He had stared at it and said, "You're going to change everything." I had laughed. I didn't know he meant it literally. My computer was still locked, but the investigator had recovered deleted files. Among them was a folder labeled with a date. Inside were recordings. Ethan had been secretly documenting conversations between me and Clara. Not ordinary conversations. Arguments. Financial discussions. Private disagreements. Moments when Clara complained that I was distant. He had collected every weakness. Then he used them. He had sent Clara anonymous messages suggesting I was having an affair. He had shown her altered financial records. He had convinced her that I was secretly preparing to leave her. I suddenly understood why Clara had changed months before the crash. She hadn't stopped loving me. She had stopped trusting what she saw, because someone had been feeding her lies. I found one final recording. Ethan was speaking to Vanessa. "You just need to keep Clara suspicious," he said. "And Daniel. Daniel will eventually leave. He always thinks silence means loyalty." I stared at the screen. That sentence stayed with me, because it was true. I had spent years believing that if I endured enough, people would eventually understand my heart. But sometimes silence didn't protect love. Sometimes it only gave betrayal room to grow. The next morning, Clara came home. She stood in the doorway of our bedroom. I heard something from Ethan. What? He was thinking about a meeting tonight. Where? An old warehouse. I looked at her. Are you sure? Yes. She hesitated. Then she said, he's planning to destroy the remaining prototype. I closed my eyes. That prototype was the only physical evidence proving the invention was mine. If it disappeared, Ethan could argue that I had stolen his work. For the first time, I felt something close to anger. Not because of the money, because he wanted to erase the years I'd spent building something with my own hands. I called the investigator, then my lawyer, then the police. We arrived at the warehouse before Ethan knew we were there. Through a gap in the door, I saw him standing with Marcus. A container sat between them. Inside were several components from my laboratory. Marcus was holding a metal case. Ethan said, "Once this is gone, Daniel has nothing." Marcus asked, "And the woman?" Ethan's face hardened. "Clara." "Yes. She'll leave him." I felt Clara's hand tremble beside me. Then Ethan said something I will never forget. "Once she's alone, she'll come back to us." Clara looked at me. Tears were running down her cheeks. Not because she loved Ethan, because she finally understood how completely he had underestimated her. The police entered. Everything happened quickly. Marcus dropped the case. Ethan tried to run. He didn't get far. As the officers placed handcuffs on him, he looked at me. "You ruined everything." I said nothing. He shouted again. "You think you're better than me?" Still, I said nothing. Then Clara stepped forward. She looked at him calmly. "No." Ethan stared at her. Clara continued, "I think I finally know who you are." That silenced him. Later, outside the warehouse, Clara leaned against my shoulder. I heard his last thought. "What was it?" She closed her eyes. "He still thinks you'll forgive him." I looked toward the police cars, then at the woman I had loved for 10 years. I probably would have. She looked up at me. "But not anymore." I shook my head. No, I wasn't saying that because I hated him. I was saying it because something inside me had changed. I had spent years believing loyalty meant staying no matter what. Now I understood something different. Loyalty could not require me to abandon myself. And the hardest part was still ahead. Because Ethan's arrest didn't fix my marriage. It only removed the person who had been poisoning it. Clara and I still had to decide whether there was anything left to save. For 3 weeks after Ethan's arrest, Clara and I lived in the same house like two strangers trying not to disturb each other. The police investigation continued. My lawyers fought the patent dispute. Marcus agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced charge, and his testimony confirmed most of what we already suspected. Ethan had stolen files. He had forged documents. He had paid Marcus to tamper with my car. He had manipulated Clara with fabricated messages. But there was one thing the investigators couldn't prove. They couldn't prove that Ethan had intended for the crash to seriously injure us. Marcus insisted he had only been told to frighten me. That distinction mattered legally. It didn't matter emotionally. I still woke up at night, remembering the sound of metal twisting around us. And Clara still woke up hearing voices that weren't there. Her ability hadn't disappeared. If anything, it had become sharper. She could now distinguish between ordinary thoughts and memories. Sometimes she heard things people had forgotten themselves. A nurse thinking about a childhood dog. A stranger remembering a funeral. A neighbor silently worrying about unpaid bills. She tried to avoid crowded places. She stopped watching television because the constant thoughts overwhelmed her. One afternoon, I found her sitting alone on the back steps. Too loud? She nodded. "You sat beside her." For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "Do you know what the worst part is?" "What?" "I can't tell when someone loves me." I looked at her. "Why?" "Because I can hear fear, doubt, anger, desire, regret." She looked down. "But love isn't always a thought." That sentence stayed with me. Maybe she had discovered something I'd spent years refusing to understand. People could say the right things and still hurt you. They could think terrible things and still choose not to act on them. And sometimes love was not what someone felt in a single moment. It was what they chose repeatedly. Clara turned toward me. "What are you thinking right now?" I smiled sadly. "That I'm afraid." She blinked. "Of what?" "Of trying again." Her expression softened. "So am I." That was the first honest conversation we'd had since the crash. No accusations. No excuses. Just fear. Over the next month, we began marriage counseling. It was uncomfortable. Our counselor asked questions neither of us wanted to answer. "Why did you hide things from each other?" I said. "I thought protecting her meant carrying everything myself." Clara said, "I thought trusting him meant I was stupid." The counselor looked at us. "Did either of you ask the other for help?" We were silent. That was the answer. We had loved each other, but we had also built separate worlds inside the same marriage. And Ethan had found the cracks. One evening, Clara came in my office. "I found something." She placed a small notebook on my desk. It was mine. I hadn't seen it in years. She opened it. Inside were sketches from the earliest version of my battery control system. I smiled. "I wrote these when we were still renting that apartment." "You drew this before we even married." "Yes." She turned the page. At the bottom was a sentence I had forgotten writing. "If this ever works, I want Clara to be the first person who sees it." She looked at me. "You wrote that?" "Apparently." She laughed through tears. "I thought your dream was the company." "No." I took the notebook from her. "The company was never the dream." "What was?" I looked at her. "Building something that mattered." She nodded. Then she asked the question I wasn't prepared for. "What if you did it without me?" I didn't understand. "What do you mean?" "Your company. Your invention. Your future." She swallowed. "What if you built it somewhere else?" I stared at her. She continued. "Daniel, I love you. But I don't know if we can become the people we were before." I felt my chest tighten. "I don't want to become who we were." She looked surprised. "I want something better." That night, I received an offer. A technology incubator in another city wanted to fund my research. They had learned about the patent dispute and reviewed the original laboratory records. They offered me a small office, funding for a new prototype, and complete independence. The offer was everything I had once dreamed about. But accepting it meant leaving the city, leaving the house, leaving the company I had built, leaving behind the version of myself that had spent years trying to hold everything together. I asked Clara what she thought. She said, "Go." I stared at her. "You're not coming?" She smiled sadly. "Not yet." It hurt, but somehow it was honest. So I left. Not because I stopped loving her. Because for the first time in my life, I understood that love did not always mean staying in the same room. Sometimes it meant giving each other enough space to become honest people again. I moved to a small coastal city 3 hours away. My new office was barely larger than a storage room. The first month was miserable. The second wasn't much better. My prototype failed repeatedly. The funding was limited. I slept on a folding bed beside my workbench. But nobody knew me as Ethan's brother. Nobody knew me as the man whose wife had once doubted him. Nobody expected me to save a marriage, rescue a company, or prove anything. For the first time, I was simply Daniel. And slowly, that felt like freedom. My first successful prototype nearly burned down the laboratory. A circuit overheated. Smoke filled the room. The alarm screamed. I stood outside coughing while my colleague, Nora, stared at me. "You call that progress?" I laughed. "It didn't explode. That's your standard?" At the moment. She shook her head. Nora had been hired as a systems engineer. She was direct, impatient, and completely unimpressed by my reputation. I liked that. She never asked about my divorce. She never asked about Ethan. She cared about the equations. When something failed, she said it failed. When something worked, she asked why. 3 months later, our prototype passed its first serious safety test. I stared at the data. The energy control system had reduced thermal instability far beyond our target. Nora looked at me. "You realize what this means?" I nodded. "It works." She smiled. "No, it really works." For the first time since the crash, I felt proud without feeling guilty. I called Clara. She answered after one ring. "Hi." "Hi." Neither of us spoke. Then I said, "The prototype passed." She laughed. "I knew you would do it." I closed my eyes. "How did you know?" "I heard you think about it." I smiled. "You can't hear thoughts over the phone." "No." "Then, I know you." That answer stayed with me all night. We didn't get back together immediately. We started slowly. A phone call every few days. A visit once a month. No promises. No pressure. Clara began working with a neurologist who helped her develop ways to manage the constant noise in her mind. She learned to focus, to separate thoughts from actions, to understand that hearing someone's darkest thought didn't mean they were a bad person. One day she called me. "I think it's getting quieter." "That's good." "Yes." She hesitated. "There's something else." "What?" "I've been thinking about leaving the company." My heart stopped. "Why?" "Because I realized I stayed there because it reminded me of you." She laughed softly. "And I don't want to live inside a museum anymore." "What will you do?" "I don't know." "Then take your time." She did. And so did I. A year passed. My research group expanded. The patent was finally granted in my name. Then a major automotive manufacturer licensed the technology. The little office became a real laboratory. People began calling me an inventor. Investors wanted meetings. News articles appeared. I hated the attention, but I accepted it because the technology was doing exactly what I had wanted. It was making electric vehicles safer. The first production model using our system passed an international safety certification with remarkable results. I stood on stage during the announcement. The applause was loud, but the person I looked for wasn't in the audience. Clara was watching from the back. She hadn't told me she was coming. After the ceremony, she approached me. "You've changed." I smiled. "So have you." She looked around the laboratory. "You built all this." "We built it." She frowned. "Who is we?" "Nora." "The team." "Everyone." Clara nodded. Then she said something unexpected. "I'm proud of you." Those 4 words meant more to me than the applause. Because for years, I had wanted her approval. Now I realized I didn't need it. But I still cherished it. That was the difference. She wasn't validating my worth anymore. She was simply sharing in my happiness. As we walked outside, Nora joined us. She handed me a folder. We got another offer. I opened it. A global research company wanted to acquire our technology for a huge amount. Clara looked at me. "You should do it." I smiled. "I'm not sure." Nora laughed. You've finally become successful, and now you're afraid of money? No. I looked at the laboratory behind us. I'm afraid of becoming the person I was before. Clara understood immediately. Then don't. That night, I made a decision. I wouldn't sell everything. Instead, I would build a company around the technology. And for the first time, I knew exactly why. Not to prove Ethan wrong. Not to make Clara regret leaving. Not to become rich. I wanted to create a workplace where people could build things without being afraid that someone would steal their work. A place built on trust. Because I knew what it felt like to lose it. I didn't know it then, but that decision would eventually bring the past back to my door. Not Ethan. Not Marcus. Someone else. Someone who had been quietly watching my success from the beginning. Someone who knew exactly how much I had once sacrificed for my marriage. And when that person finally approached me, they would force me to decide whether the life I had built could include love again. The person waiting outside my office was Vanessa. I almost didn't recognize her. She looked thinner than she had in the photograph, but her eyes were steady. I heard you were building a company, she said. I am. Congratulations. I didn't invite her inside. What do you want? She took a breath. To tell you the truth before someone else tells it for me. I stared at her. What truth? She looked toward the laboratory. Ethan wasn't the only person involved. My stomach tightened. Who else? She hesitated. Then she said, Your former financial director. I knew the name immediately. Richard. He had worked with me for 7 years before suddenly resigning 6 months after the crash. At the time, I assumed he wanted retirement. Vanessa shook her head. He was the one who helped Ethan clone your credentials. I felt the old anger return, but it didn't last. I had learned not to let anger make decisions for me. Why are you telling me now? Because Richard contacted me last week. About what? He wants money. I laughed bitterly. Of course he does. He says he has documents. What documents? The original plan. My expression changed. What plan? Vanessa looked directly at me. The crash. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. She continued. Ethan wasn't supposed to be the one making the decisions. Richard was. I remember the warehouse. The police. Marcus. Ethan's desperate expression. Everything suddenly felt incomplete. I called my lawyer. We met that evening. Vanessa handed over copies of messages, bank records, and encrypted emails. The evidence showed Richard had coordinated the financial transfers. Ethan had been ambitious and reckless, but Richard had designed the scheme. He had convinced Ethan that if I disappeared from the company, the patent could be claimed through forged ownership documents. Ethan thought he was taking control. Richard intended to take everything from both of us. The crash had been meant to scare me into abandoning the company. But when Clara was injured, even Ethan had panicked. He had told Marcus to stop. Marcus had already acted. That was the part Ethan had never admitted. The accident hadn't been an elaborate murder plot. It had been something more ordinary and, in some ways, more frightening. A chain of selfish decisions. One person lying, another covering it up, another believing they could control the consequences. And eventually, 2 people were trapped inside a wrecked car. I looked at the evidence. Where is Richard now? Vanessa answered. He's leaving the country tomorrow. We reported everything. This time, the authorities had enough evidence to act. Richard was arrested before he could disappear. The case against Ethan became stronger too. The legal process moved slowly, as these things do. There was no dramatic courtroom confession. No kumbanien mirakla. Just months of documents, interviews, hearings, and testimony. But eventually, the truth became impossible to bury. Ethan received a prison sentence for fraud and conspiracy. Richard received a longer sentence because of his role in orchestrating the scheme. Marcus testified and accepted responsibility for his part in the crash. None of it made me feel victorious. When the final judgment came, I sat alone in my office. I expected relief. Instead, I felt tired. The past had finally stopped chasing me, and I realized I didn't want to spend the rest of my life looking backward. That evening, Clara came to my apartment. She stood by the window. You seem sad. I thought I'd feel happier. She nodded. I understand. Do you? She smiled faintly. I can hear thoughts, Daniel. Happiness isn't always loud. I laughed. That's something only you could say. She turned toward me. Then her expression became serious. Can I tell you what I heard when I walked in? What? You were thinking that you wish Ethan had never been your brother. I looked down. That's true. Then you thought something else. What? That if you had known what he was capable of, you would have stopped trusting everyone. I nodded. Did you? No. She came closer. You still trust people. I learned to trust differently. She looked at me. Ow. I'll watch what they do. She smiled. Good. We stood quietly. Then she said, I need to tell you something. What? I've been offered a job. Where? Here. I looked at her. She explained that the neurologist she had been working with wanted her to help develop a program for people experiencing unusual sensory disturbances after brain injuries. Her ability had made her frightened, but it had also given her a perspective no researcher could easily reproduce. She wanted to use it to help others. I smiled. That's perfect. She looked nervous. You think so? I know so. For the first time in years, Clara's future wasn't connected to mine. And somehow, that made me love her more. She wasn't coming back because she needed me. She was coming back because she had built a life she wanted. So had I. That night, we talked until sunrise. Not about Ethan. Not about the crash. Not about the company. We talked about us. The ugly parts. The beautiful parts. The things we had done wrong. The things we could still do right. Then Clara asked quietly, Do you still love me? I didn't answer immediately. Yes. Her eyes filled with tears. Do you still want to be my husband? I looked at her. Not the way we were before. She understood. Then how? Slowly. She smiled. I could do slowly. I took her hand. There was no dramatic kiss. No promise that everything would magically return to normal. Just two people sitting together, knowing they had broken something precious and deciding that if they rebuilt it, they would build it differently. For a while it worked. We began seeing each other again. We cooked together. We argued about stupid things. We laughed. We learned each other's habits again. But then something happened that neither of us expected. Clara stopped hearing my thoughts. At first, we thought it was temporary. She noticed it one morning when I was standing in the kitchen making coffee. She stared at me. What? She looked confused. Nothing. What? I can't hear you. I laughed. You mean you can't hear what I'm thinking? She nodded. Try. I thought about the coffee. Nothing happened. I thought about the weather. Nothing. Then I deliberately thought about something embarrassing. Still nothing. Clara started crying. Not because she was afraid. Because for the first time since the crash, her mind was quiet. The ability had disappeared. The neurologist said it might return. It might not. Clara wasn't sure how she felt. Part of me is relieved, she told me. And the other part? Scared. Why? Because now I have to trust people without hearing what's inside them. I smiled. Welcome to the rest of humanity. She laughed. That became one of our favorite jokes. But something else changed. Without the ability to hear my thoughts, Clara had to ask questions. If she wondered whether I was upset, she asked. If she feared I was hiding something, she asked. If she needed reassurance, she asked. And I had to answer. I couldn't hide behind silence anymore. Neither could she. Months passed. Our relationship became stronger. Not perfect, stronger. Then came the biggest opportunity of my career. A consortium of international manufacturers wanted to adopt our safety system. The deal could make the company one of the leading battery safety firms in the industry. But there was a condition. They wanted controlling ownership. I refused. The board thought I was crazy. Nora asked me why. Because I know what happens when control becomes more important than trust. She nodded. We structured a different agreement. Employee ownership, independent oversight, transparent patents. No single executive could secretly transfer intellectual property. It cost us more money in the short term, but gave me something more important. Peace. The company grew anyway. Within 2 years, we employed hundreds of people. I became financially successful enough to buy the lakeside house Clara and I had once dreamed about. But I didn't buy it. Instead, I bought a larger property nearby and turned it into a small research and retreat center for injured workers and young engineers who couldn't afford expensive laboratories. Clara helped design the mental health program. We named the place Haven. One evening, we stood beside the lake. Clara looked at the water. Do you remember when you promised me a house here? Yes. You never gave me one. I smiled. I know. She looked at me. Good. I laughed. Good. Because this is better. She gestured toward Haven. You didn't build a house for me. She smiled. You built something for people. I took her hand. Maybe that's what I should have done from the beginning. She leaned against my shoulder. Then she asked, do you ever think about what would have happened if the crash never occurred? Sometimes. What do you imagine? I looked across the lake. I imagine we'd still be together. She nodded. And I imagine we'd still be lying to ourselves. She was quiet. Then she said, I think you're right. The truth wasn't romantic, but it was peaceful. The crash had not saved our marriage. The crash had exposed it. We had been drifting apart long before the car hit that barrier. Ethan hadn't created every crack. He had simply found the ones we refused to repair. 1 year later, Clara and I renewed our vows. Not in a church, not in a hotel. At Haven, there were only a few friends, some employees, and the people who had helped us survive the darkest year of our lives. Clara stood across from me. I once thought love meant knowing everything about someone. She smiled. Now I think love means choosing to know them, even when you don't. I took her hands. I once thought protecting someone meant carrying their burdens alone. I looked into her eyes. Now I know it means letting them carry some of mine. We didn't promise forever. We promised honesty. That was enough. As everyone applauded, I saw Vanessa standing quietly near the back. She had completed her cooperation agreement and rebuilt her life. She nodded at me. I nodded back. Some people from our past didn't need to become friends again. They simply needed to stop being enemies. And for the first time, I felt completely free from the story that had once controlled my life. I thought the hardest chapter was over. I was wrong, because the next morning, Clara received a letter. It was from Ethan, and inside, it was a confession that changed the way she remembered the night of the crash. The letter was only 2 pages long. Clara read it once, then again. Then she handed it to me without saying a word. I recognized Ethan's handwriting immediately. The first line was simple. Daniel, there is something I never told you. I kept reading. He admitted that Richard had approached him months before the crash. He admitted that he had been jealous of me for years. Not because I had more money, because I had something he believed he could never earn. Respect. Ethan wrote that he had spent his childhood feeling like the lesser brother. Our father had praised me for being responsible. Teachers had called me dependable. Relatives compared us. Ethan hated every comparison, but the letter wasn't an excuse. He knew that. He wrote that he had chosen jealousy over loyalty. Then came the part that made Clara sit down. The night of the crash, I was not trying to kill Daniel. I stared at the page. I wanted him to abandon the company. I wanted him to think his life was in danger, so he would leave. Richard told me Marcus would only interfere with the car enough to frighten him. Clara whispered, "Keep reading." I did, but I didn't know Clara would be with him. I stopped. Clara closed her eyes. Ethan continued. When I learned she was in the car, I told Marcus to stop. He said it was already done. Then another sentence. I heard the call from the hospital before Daniel knew how badly she was injured. My hands began to shake. Ethan had known. He had known she might die, and he had still waited. The final paragraph was worse. The reason I tried to make Clara doubt Daniel wasn't only about the company. I knew she was the one person who could convince him to stop fighting. I thought if I made her believe Daniel had betrayed her, Daniel would leave everything behind. Clara looked at me. That's what he wanted. Yes. Us apart. I nodded. She wiped her eyes. Then she said something unexpected. I don't hate him. I looked at her. Neither do I. She seemed surprised. After everything, I hate what he did. I folded the letter. But I don't want to spend another year carrying him inside my head. She smiled faintly. Neither do I. We decided not to visit Ethan. The letter was enough. But the confession changed something inside me. For years, I had wondered whether I had missed some warning. Whether I should have noticed Ethan's jealousy. Whether I should have protected Clara better. Whether I had failed because I was too trusting. Now I understood something important. Trust wasn't stupidity. Trust was a choice. What mattered was what someone did with it. That afternoon, Clara and I went to the lake. We sat beneath an old tree. I want to tell you something, she said. Okay. The first thing I heard after the crash wasn't Ethan. I looked at her. What? You. She smiled sadly. You were thinking, please let her live. I don't care what happens to me. I remembered that moment. The ambulance lights. The broken glass. Her hand slipping away. I thought you heard Ethan first. I told you that because I was scared. What? Because if I told you I heard you, I knew what you'd say. What? That you'd do anything for me. I laughed softly. I probably would. She looked at me. That's what scared me. I frowned. Why? Because I realized how much of your life you'd sacrifice for me. I looked toward the water. She continued. You delayed your invention because you're trying to build our house. You don't know that. I heard enough. I smiled. Maybe. She took my hand. I don't want to be the reason you give things up anymore. You're not. I know. She squeezed my fingers. That's why I stayed. That sentence was simple, but it meant everything. Our marriage had survived not because we forgot what happened. It survived because we stopped pretending it hadn't. A month later, something unexpected happened at Haven. A young engineer named Sammy came to my office. He was 24, brilliant, and terrified. He had developed a new battery cooling concept, but was afraid to present it because his previous employer had stolen one of his ideas. I understood immediately. Show me. He hesitated. What if you take it? I leaned back. Then you shouldn't work here. He looked confused. I continued. Your idea belongs to you. If you join us, we'll protect that. He showed me the design. It was excellent. We hired him. That became the beginning of something bigger. Haven started accepting young inventors who had been exploited by larger companies. We gave them laboratories, legal protection, mentorship, and ownership agreements. The company grew, not because we chased profit, because people trusted us. And that was the one thing money had never been able to buy me. Trust. 2 years after the crash, Haven received an international award for ethical innovation. I was asked to give a speech. I almost refused. Then Clara said, Go. What should I talk about? She smiled. Tell them what you learned. So I stood on that stage. Hundreds of people watched me. I didn't mention Ethan. I didn't mention the crash. I said, the most expensive mistake I've ever made wasn't a failed invention. It was believing that protecting people meant making decisions for them. The room went silent. I learned that trust without communication becomes fragile. Ambition without ethics becomes dangerous. And success without peace is another kind of failure. When I finished, the applause lasted longer than I expected. Clara was standing near the front. She was smiling. Not because I had become successful, because she knew who I had been before anyone else saw it. That night, we returned home. She looked at me. You know what I was thinking during your speech? I laughed. Now you can't hear my thoughts anymore, remember? Exactly. She smiled. That's the point. I kissed her forehead. For the first time, I didn't need to know what she was thinking. I trusted her to tell me, and she trusted me enough to ask. We had finally become the couple we had promised to be 10 years earlier. Not because nothing had gone wrong, because we had learned how to face what went wrong together. Then, one winter morning, a lawyer called me. He said Ethan wanted to meet, not to apologize, not to ask for forgiveness. He wanted to give me something he claimed had been hidden from Richard, something that could reveal the final truth about the crash. I didn't want to go. Clara didn't either. But there are some doors you close only after seeing what is behind them. So I agreed to one meeting. The prison visiting room was colder than I expected. Ethan walked in wearing a plain uniform. He looked older, not dramatically, just tired. He sat across from me. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he said, You look happy. I am. He smiled bitterly. I knew you would say that. I didn't ask how he knew. He placed a small envelope on the table. Richard kept this hidden. I opened it. Inside was a storage device. What is it? A recording. Of what? The conversation between Richard and Marcus before the crash. My lawyer had already requested the evidence. But Ethan shook his head. This wasn't in the official files. I looked at him. Why not? Because Richard erased it. Then how do you have it? I found a backup. I stared at him. Why get it to me now? His eyes dropped. Because I finally understand something. What? You were never my enemy. I said nothing. You were the person I wanted to become. His voice cracked, and I hated you for it. I looked at my brother. There was a time when I would have hugged him. There was a time when I would have said everything was forgiven. But I wasn't that man anymore. I could understand him without rescuing him. I hope you become someone you can respect, I said. He looked up. Can you forgive me? I thought about the question. Yes. His eyes filled with tears. But forgiveness doesn't mean I bring you back into my life. He nodded slowly. I know. That was the first mature conversation we'd ever had. No shouting. No excuses. No pretending. Just consequences. Before I left, he asked one final question. Does Clara hate me? I answered honestly. No. He looked relieved. Then I added, but she doesn't trust you. He nodded. I don't deserve it. No. He looked down. But maybe one day. Maybe. I stood. He didn't ask me to stay. That mattered. Outside the prison, Clara was waiting in the car. I got in. What did he give you? I showed her the storage device. She looked at it. Do you want to listen? I shook my head. Not today. Why? Because I already know enough. She smiled. That's progress. We drove home. I never listened to the recording. My lawyer did. The authorities did. It confirmed what we already knew. Richard had planned the sabotage. Ethan had agreed. Marcus had carried it out. There was no hidden mastermind. No final twist that changed everything. Just people making terrible choices. And that was enough. A few months later, Ethan's appeal failed. Richard's sentence was finalized. Marcus completed his cooperation and left the state. The story was over. But my life wasn't. Clara and I moved into a modest house near Haven. Not the giant lakeside mansion I had once imagined. Something smaller, warmer. There was a garden, a workshop, a library, and a kitchen where we argued about who had burned dinner. One spring evening, Clara came home carrying a small box. What is that? She opened it. Inside was the silver bracelet. Still us. She smiled. I think we should change the engraving. I laughed. To what? She turned the bracelet over. Still choosing. I looked at her. That's better. She nodded. We had spent years believing love was something you found once and protected forever. Now we knew better. Love was a decision made repeatedly. Sometimes softly. Sometimes painfully. Sometimes after everything had fallen apart. That night, we sat on the porch. The lake reflected the moonlight. Clara leaned against me. Do you ever wish the crash never happened? I thought about it. Yes. She waited. Do you? Yes. Then she smiled. But I wouldn't erase what came after. I understood. Neither of us was grateful for the pain. We were grateful for what we learned from surviving it. I looked at the house, at the garden, at the lights of Haven in the distance, at the woman beside me, and I realized something. The greatest thing I had built wasn't the company. It wasn't the patent. It wasn't the laboratory. It wasn't even the life we had rebuilt. It was the ability to look at the past without needing to live there. Ethan had once believed he could destroy me by taking away everything I valued. He was wrong. He could take my company. He could steal my files. He could poison my marriage. He could put me inside a wrecked car. But he couldn't decide who I became afterward. That choice belonged to me. And I chose peace. I chose work that mattered. I chose people who respected boundaries. I chose a marriage built on questions instead of assumptions. And I chose a future that didn't require anyone from my past to regret losing me. Clara rested her head on my shoulder. You're thinking again. I smiled. You can't hear it. I don't need to. She closed her eyes. I know you. And for the first time, that was enough. 5 years after the crash, Haven had grown into something I never imagined. What began as a tiny laboratory had become a place where young engineers, researchers, and inventors could work without fearing that someone would steal their ideas or turn their weaknesses against them. I still visited the laboratory every morning, but I no longer needed to be there every hour. That had been another lesson I learned the hard way. A company shouldn't depend entirely on one person. Neither should a marriage. Clara had built her own career too. She worked with rehabilitation centers and researchers studying unusual sensory experiences after brain injuries. Her ability to hear thoughts had never returned. Occasionally, she missed it. Mostly, she didn't. She told me once that silence had become her favorite sound. Our life was ordinary in ways I had once thought were impossible. We argued about groceries. We forgot anniversaries and remembered them 2 days late. We got sick. We laughed at terrible movies. We sometimes sat together without speaking for an hour. And none of those quiet moments felt empty anymore. One Saturday morning, our daughter, Lily, ran into the kitchen carrying a broken toy. Fix it. I looked at her. Good morning to you too. Fix it, Dad. Clara laughed from behind me. You created this monster. I taught her confidence. You taught her that everything can be repaired. I took the toy. Not everything. Clara looked at me. Most things. I smiled. Some things shouldn't be repaired. She knew what I meant. Our old marriage had ended. The one we had now was something different. Stronger. More honest. That afternoon, we went to Haven for an anniversary event. 5 years earlier, I had been afraid of losing everything. Now I stood in front of hundreds of people who had built their futures under our roof. I looked across the audience. Sammy was now leading his own research team. Nora had become Chief Technology Officer. Young engineers I had never met were presenting inventions that could save lives. Clara stood beside Lily near the front. I thought about the man I had been before the crash. Patient, loyal, forgiving, but also afraid. Afraid that saying no would make people leave. Afraid that setting boundaries would make me selfish. Afraid that if I stopped carrying everyone, everything would collapse. The crash had not made me stronger overnight. It had simply forced me to stop pretending I wasn't exhausted. After the ceremony, Nora came to me. You know what your problem is? I laughed. Only one. You still think success is about what you build, isn't it? She shook her head. It's about what happens after you leave. I looked around Haven. She was right. That was the final stage of growth. Not proving that I could build something. Proving that what I built could continue without me. That evening, Clara and I walked home. Lily ran ahead. The sunset stretched across the lake. Clara took my hand. I got a letter today. From who? She hesitated. Ethan. I stopped walking. What does he want? He didn't ask for anything. Then what did he say? He said he's being released next month. I was quiet. Clara continued. He says he doesn't expect to see us. I nodded. That's probably wise. She looked at me. Are you angry? No. Afraid? I thought about it. No. Then what? I smiled. Nothing. And that was true. 5 years earlier, hearing Ethan's name would have changed my entire mood. Now it was simply a name from a chapter that had ended. Clara leaned against me. I think that's what closure feels like. I nodded. But when we reached home, another letter was waiting. This one was not from Ethan. It was from a university where I had studied engineering. They wanted me to speak at graduation. The topic was trust. I almost laughed. Of all the things they could have asked me to talk about, I accepted. 2 weeks later, I stood before hundreds of graduating students. I looked at their excited faces. They reminded me of myself 20 years earlier. I told them about failure, about ambition, about protecting intellectual property, about choosing good people. Then I said something that had nothing to do with engineering. Never confuse patience with permission. The room became quiet. You can forgive someone and still walk away. You can love someone and still set a boundary. You can lose something precious and still build a meaningful life afterward. I paused. And if someone leaves your life because you finally respected yourself, let them go. I saw Clara smiling in the audience. I continued. The goal isn't to become so successful that the people who hurt you regret losing you. I looked at the students. The goal is to become so whole that their regret no longer matters. The applause came slowly, then all at once. After the ceremony, Clara hugged me. That was beautiful. I stole it from experience. She laughed. No, you earned it. That night, we returned to Haven. The lights were on. Students were still working. Somebody was arguing about a circuit design. Someone else was laughing. The building was alive. I stood at the entrance for a moment. 5 years ago, I thought my life had ended inside a crushed car. I had been wrong. It had only changed direction. Years later, I sometimes wondered whether Clara remembered the exact moment her ability began. She did. She said it was the instant she opened her eyes and heard Ethan thinking about the blue folder. But when I asked what she remembered most clearly, she gave me a different answer. Your hand. My hand. You were holding mine. I smiled. I thought you were unconscious. I was. She looked at me, but I could still feel you. We were sitting on the porch of our house. Lily was asleep inside. The lake was completely still. Clara rested her head on my shoulder. Do you ever think about the life we might have had? Sometimes. Would you change anything? I considered the question carefully. I would change what I did before the crash. Like what? I would talk more. She smiled. I would ask for help. Good. I would tell you my plans instead of trying to surprise you. She laughed. And I would tell you when I was afraid instead of believing every thought I heard. We sat quietly. Then she asked, "What about Ethan?" I looked at the lake. "I hope he's okay." She nodded. "He is." "How do you know?" "He sent a letter." I looked at her. "What did it say?" "He said he's working at a rehabilitation center after completing his sentence." I was surprised. "Doing what?" "Maintenance." I laughed softly. "Of course." She smiled. "He wrote that he finally understands what it means to repair something." I didn't answer. Some things didn't need an answer. Ethan had paid for what he did. Not with some dramatic punishment. Not with humiliation. With time. With lost trust. With the knowledge that his choices had permanently changed his life. And that was enough. I never visited him. I never became his best friend again. I never pretended the past didn't happen. But I stopped hating him. That was freedom too. The next morning, I walked through Haven before sunrise. The building was quiet. I entered the first laboratory. On the wall was a photograph of our original team. Nora, Sammy, Clara, me. Behind the photograph was a small plaque. It read, "Build what you wish existed." I touched it. Then I smiled. Because that was exactly what I had done. I had wanted a company where trust mattered. So I built one. I had wanted a marriage where honesty mattered. So Clara and I rebuilt ours. I had wanted a future where my worth wasn't measured by someone else's approval. So I created it. Not perfectly, not easily, but honestly. When I returned home, Clara was waiting at the kitchen table. She slid a cup of coffee toward me. "You're late. You're becoming strict. Someone has to keep you under control." I sat beside her. She smiled. Then she said, "Do you remember the first thing you told me when we met? That your helmet was terrible?" "No. You said I was terrible at business." She laughed. "You were. And yet you married me." I was young. Still married me. She reached across the table. "Still choosing you." I held her hand. Those words meant more than forever ever could. Because forever was an idea. Choosing was an action. And every morning, we chose. We chose honesty. We chose patience. We chose boundaries. We chose to speak when silence would be easier. We chose to forgive without forgetting. We chose to build instead of destroy. And sometimes, when I thought about the man I had been before the crash, I felt compassion for him. He had believed being a good husband meant enduring everything. He had believed being a good brother meant forgiving everything. He had believed success meant making everyone proud. He had been wrong. Being good did not mean allowing people to hurt you. Forgiveness did not require returning to the same place. And success did not mean winning against the people who try to break you. Success meant waking up one morning and realizing you no longer needed them to validate your existence. That was my real victory. Not the patent, not the company, not the money, not the courtroom, not even the beautiful house beside the lake. It was the quiet certainty that I belonged to myself. Clara once had the terrifying ability to hear thoughts no one was supposed to know. But in the end, the greatest truth wasn't hidden inside anyone's mind. It was something we had to learn through years of pain. People will disappoint you. Some will betray you. Some will regret losing you only after you stop chasing them. And some will spend the rest of their lives wishing they could undo what they did. But your healing cannot depend on their regret. Your future cannot depend on their apology. And your worth cannot depend on whether they finally recognize it. I had spent years trying to keep everyone from leaving. Then the crash taught me something I should have understood much earlier. Sometimes losing people is not the end of your life. Sometimes it is the moment your life finally becomes yours. Clara squeezed my hand. "Where are you going?" I looked at her. "Nowhere." She smiled. "Good." Outside, the sun was rising over the lake. Our daughter was laughing upstairs. Haven was waiting for another day. And for the first time, I wasn't looking backward. I wasn't waiting for anyone to regret losing me. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was simply living. And that was enough.